All right. So I think we'll probably get started. I can't start my video, Dave. It's saying that I'm not like allowed to do my video.
Give me a second.
Okay.
You should, let's see, hold on. You are the host now, so I think you should be fine. Try now.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. Let's see. Okay, let me share my screen. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So this is the Localscapes Design workshop. It's going to be a little bit different than we've done it before, just because it's over Zoom. So first, I'll start out saying, I guess I'm Hattie Ann Fasselt. You probably already knew that. We have Dave Rice in the background. He'll be helping with just kind of some background stuff and answering questions that he can answer. And then also, as far as answering question goes, so this class is going to be a little bit different than our other ones, in that I'm going to stop and have time for questions. So if you're wanting to unmute yourself and ask questions, then we do ask that you use that raise the hand button for that, just because it is going to be a good time for us to stop and ask questions, because we're trying to make this a little bit more where it was a workshop before. We're trying to make it be a little bit like that, so that you can ask questions depending on what you have and what's going on in your own personal landscape. So we ask that you use the raise hand button when we have time for questions, when we stop for them. A little bit about Weber Basin. And so we have like a conservation side, and that's where we're teaching classes and things. But the main part of Weber Basin is the fact that we provide water to the five different districts. I think it's Morgan, Davis, Weber, Boxelder, and Summit, that's right. Thanks, Dave. We provide drinking water as well as secondary water. So yeah, I think that's everything that we usually go through at the very beginning. So yeah, let's get started.
Hattie Ann, really quick, yeah, before you start, I made you the host, and so now I have zero controls. If you could make me the co-host. Okay. And then I can take care of their hand raising and unmuting, muting.
Let's see. I can figure. Oh, here we go. Okay.
There you go.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Okay, here we go. So what to expect from this class is we're going to be making a layout of the 5 different Localscape elements, and then a general layout of the plants. We're not going to go into any specific plants, because that's I mean, we're going to have classes on some perennials. We've had classes on trees and things. But as far as like the picking of the plants, that's pretty much your preference and something that you get to fully decide. So we're going to let plant lists and things be done after this class. We're just going to be focusing on the layout and then the general plant placement and things. And the first thing is that fancy drawings aren't necessary. So a lot of people get really caught up on the fact that their landscape design doesn't look super duper fancy, and it doesn't have to be. You're going to see some of my my examples that I've come up with. They're not super fancy at all. I did them all by hand, and so they don't have to be super fancy. Just as long as you can read what they mean, that's what's important. Tools that we're going to be using, or that are good to have. So this little circle template, I have mine right here, and then a scale. It doesn't necessarily have to be an architectural scale. That's the one I have. This can be handy in specific situations, but it's usually when you have like scaled it to a certain size on the computer and you're able to like make it match your architectural scale, but when doing it the way that that we have done it, it's just a little bit easier to just do it based on like the normal ruler, which I have right here. It just like goes 1 to 12. So I'm doing it a little bit different in that I'm going to start with a conceptual design first. So conceptual design is just pretty much just picking the areas where you're wanting to put them, not putting any sort of shape to them or like specifics on size or anything. You're just going to be making the area, just say this area is going to be my central open shape. This area is going to be my gathering area. So you can see there on the right, it doesn't really look like a real landscape design, right? Because we have random shapes. We have just like arrows pointing to our different areas where we want pathways. So it's not very professional at this point, and that's okay. It's a great place to start because you just kind of start with, okay, this is the general area of where I want this. I'm not worried about the shape. I'm not worried about how big it is. This is just kind of where I'm thinking I want to put it. So we're going to start with the central open shape. And these are the questions that you're wanting to ask yourself when you're thinking about where you want to put that central open shape is, where would the lawn be used the most? That's one thing, is like most houses are completely lawn, right? And the examples that I have, I took just from like, well, a couple were from some random properties that I found on Google Maps just to get the different shapes, like our rectangle, angular, and corner lots, and just seeing the picture from the bird's eye view on the maps, all these lawns were almost completely, or all of these properties were almost completely lawn. So figuring out where is the lawn being used the most? That's your central open shape. Where is the area that you want that central open shape, right? Where are you wanting it to have that kind of negative space in between all of your plants and things? And then you're going to place a circle approximately where you'd want that central open shape, right? I'll show you all of this also as we go. So I'll have a time where I'm going to show you kind of how to make that conceptual design. Next are your gathering areas, right? You need to consider the sun exposure. If you have like a time of the day that you use it the most, what your budget's like, the purpose of that gathering area, if you want privacy in that gathering area or there's trees in the area, those are things that you want to consider when you're picking the places to put. So if you already have an existing landscape, that's one thing that you need to think of, is like, I have a huge tree in that area. That would be really nice to have a seating area underneath that tree because it's shaded, and it'll be really nice to sit underneath the shade underneath there all day. So those are just things to think about. For the conceptual design, you need to think about where could you put an area for seating? Where do you want them in relation to the house? Is there anywhere in your yard that isn't used that you could put a seating area? A lot of like side yards are not used a ton, so it's a great place to put a little bench, like with a pathway, right? So the instructions for this is you're going to use a square to be kind of your gathering area conceptual shape for that one. So circle is for central open shape, square we're going to use for the gathering areas. Your activity zone considerations. First thing that I would say to do, you could probably even do this while I'm talking about it, is to make a list of the activity zones you're wanting. So it's really going to depend on you and the size of your family or the situation that you're in. I think most of the examples I came up with, I have like a sandbox, and in the sandbox I have like a playground set, and then I have a fire pit. That's sort of a gathering area as well. I feel like it's an activity zone, but it's also a gathering area. And then a vegetable garden, I think, is all the ones that I have for my yard. The one I do have a trampoline because there was a trampoline in that yard, so I decided to keep it. So first, make a list of all the activity zone area things that you want to have in your yard. Remember, this is all dependent on you, like what you are wanting in your yard. But then you want to consider the sun exposure, trees in the area, again, privacy, purpose, time of day that you use it the most, and then your budget, right? So again, if you have a huge tree, that's a good spot to put a play area for kids, because then you don't have the sun beating down on them all day. But you do want to make sure that maybe your play area is in line of your kitchen window so that you can keep an eye on them while they're out there, right? So those are things to consider. I didn't take the work time. I'm not gonna have work time. That's supposed to just be like, here's this activity zone. Anyways, so the questions you need to ask yourself is, what will you be using the spaces for? What time of the day will they be used the most? And then where are they going to fit best in the landscape? So those are the main things that you need to be asking yourself as you're deciding what to put and where to put them. So then for your activity zones, it's going to be a pointed, like kind of like a star shape is what I've decided to put on all of my conceptual places for my activity zones. And I didn't do this one too. This is pathways. It's not supposed to say work time. But the questions for pathways is, what areas in the landscape need to be connected together? Will you be using these seasonally? That's something that's really important to think of. So your primary pathways we talked about in previous classes, those are your pathways that you're using like all year round, right? So during the winter, summer, all the time. So like during the winter, you're plowing that and you're shoveling off the snow. So you want it to be a material that the snowplow can go over, that you can easily shovel the stuff off of, that you're not going to be ripping up gravel or flagstones or anything. So you need to make sure that these pathways that you're considering, am I using this seasonally, and then putting correct material dependent on that. And then will these be high traffic areas, right? So usually the pathway to like the front of your door can be considered a high traffic area, right? And then for the conceptual design, you're just going to be using arrows. So you'll do an arrow to the place that you're connecting, draw a line, and then do an arrow to just connect that pathway to show where the traffic's going to flow. And then your landscape plantings fill in the rest of your area, right? Let me see what my next slide is. Okay, so then we get into more of our design. So I'm going to switch my camera. I have a little thing set up here. Hopefully it'll work. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Well, while you're transitioning, Hadian, just a reminder to everybody, you should have your base map in front of you.
Yeah.
So now as Hadian goes through some of these examples, you can be doing this with her on your base map. Hopefully you have multiple copies, because you're going to use, or trace paper or something, because you're going to use these to start your design process now.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Dave. I should have said that at the very beginning. Make sure to have your base maps. Can you see, Dave, the thing? Is that what's taking up the screen? My little example here?
Yeah, it looks fine.
Perfect. Sweet. Okay, so here is the example that I've come up with. There we go. So this is a corner lot example. So first thing we're doing, right, is our conceptual design. So I'm going to get a piece of trace paper and put that over it. Now let me grab my trace paper. So I'm just going to slide this trace paper over it so I can still see everything underneath there, right? And what's underneath is my existing landscape. And then I like to use a pencil for my conceptual designs, just because if I decide I want things to be in different places, then I can easily erase. So we're going to start out with our central open shape, right? So in this yard, everything that, so like this is a plant bed, this is a random plant bed, these are plant beds, trees, existing trees, and then everything else is grass. So I'm going to look at this landscape, and if I owned this house, I'm going to say, okay, what areas in my yard are used the most? What turf areas are used the most? I'm going to think to myself, probably not this side area, because we have our north arrow going this way. So if we have our compass here, this is like the side of the yard. It's the west side of the yard. I mean, it's not going to be used a ton. north side is nice and shady, so that's probably where the kids play a lot. And then the front yard, usually you have a little bit of an open shape. So, so looking at this, I'm going to decide, okay, I want central open shape, maybe in that area. And if we have, so back here, we probably have like a little back door. I want central open shape over there. So I'm going to label this central open. Central open. That's not backwards, is it, Dave?
No, it looks fine.
Very good, very good. Wonderful. So we have our central open shapes there, right? We have just drawn a circle. So if you guys are doing it on your own right now, you'll just use a circle. Again, so this class is going to be recorded too, so you can always go back and reference this if you feel like it's going a little bit too fast. We're just going to try to get through the material and then answer questions and things, but definitely come back and reference this class so that you can make your design all the way like you want it to be. So next are our gathering areas. So I decided, so since we have this back door, I want a gathering area back here, kind of like a patio. And then we have this area that's not like going to be used a ton. So this will be a really nice place to put some gathering areas. Let's see, I kind of want one on this little corner as people are walking back. And then maybe it'll be nice to have one back here, right? And then I'm going to put a gathering spot underneath this tree because that'll be nice to have a little sitting area there. And then we have this tree, so I'm going to put a little sitting area underneath here as well. So there's all of my gathering areas. Next are my activity zones. So in this corner, we do have a plant bed here, but it's a great corner to maybe have, this is a fence, by the way. But this is a great corner to maybe have like a fire pit, which is kind of a gathering area, kind of an activity zone. I'm going to say it's an activity zone. So I'm going to use my kind of star pokey shape for my activity zones. I'm going to do it there. And then maybe do a play area, sandbox back here with the shade of the tree. And then we have this area, which is on the west side, but it's going to be getting you might get enough sun. So I'm going to plan for a vegetable garden there, but I'm also going to keep that kind of on the back burner also because I don't know if that area is going to get enough sun. But for now, we're going to plan on that being the vegetable garden. So there's our activity zones. Now we need to add our pathways. So we need a pathway connecting the driveway to our vegetable garden. Our vegetable garden will need to connect to all the different areas back here. So our activity zones, and then that will connect to our central open shape. And we need to connect our gathering area to our fire pit. And then we'll probably want a pathway between here and the fence. So here's our fence door. And we need a pathway connecting this little driveway area to our central open shape.
Could I just add one thing? That this is, remember, for everyone, don't overthink this. This is really just conceptualizing and throwing ideas on paper. So this is in no way your final design, and you can certainly modify this and erase and change as you go. You're just trying to get your ideas out to get your brain moving in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right, Dave. This is just a way for you to get your pencil on the paper. That's usually the hardest part of starting your design, is getting your pencil on the paper and actually drawing something. So this is an easier way to do it without also worrying about the shape and worrying about what plants I'm going to put in, because this, you're not thinking about the plants. You're just thinking, this is the general area where I want this maybe. And yet, like Dave said, it is something that you can go back and change too, which is nice. So that here is our conceptual design that we have for this area. And then all the things in between, those are our plant beds. So there's our conceptual design. So now we're gonna get a little bit more into our, I'm gonna share my screen again. Here we go. So now we're gonna get a little bit more into specifics, but maybe we'll stop. Is there any specific questions about our central or our conceptual designs? It's pretty straightforward. But were there any specific questions about that? If not, we can.
There haven't been any yet. And again, reminder, you can use the little raise hand button and then we can allow you to, we can unmute you. This group is really small, so we can unmute you and allow you to ask the question verbally, or feel free to type the question in the Q&A box. Either way, if you have questions.
Sweet.
I would add one other quick thing, though, that conceptual thing. Some of you may be starting with a blank slate. That's really easy because, you know, it's a blank canvas. You can put anything anywhere. With existing, you do have to consider all of your existing trees and things that maybe are structurally you can't move. But either way, that concept thing works. It's just a different mindset, you know, blank slate versus, you know, already existing obstacles and fixed things.
Yeah, exactly. And I have some examples of starting off of a blank slate from the examples that I found online. So I'll show those as well, kind of how you can change the design because you're doing your own thing right from the very beginning, right? All right, so now we're going to get into a little bit more specifics with shapes and maybe sizing. So another thing is you want to make sure that you have your scale to proportion, right? So for this example, what I did, so when I was doing my base map, I went and I took, I don't know if you can see my video, but I took the property and I measured it on Google Maps. So I know based off of that what things are, so like the length of things. So I just took my ruler and I lined it up and I said, okay, at like, I think for this one it was 8 inches was equal to 112 feet. So I kind of just used that and like halved it until I got close to like 5 feet and then kind of use that as my scale. So make sure that you have your scale done so that you know the sizes of plants, so you know how big your central open shape is. And that's what you can use your ruler for. I hope that made sense. But as far as like shaping and things go, we're going to go over like 2 different looks that you can do. On here they have formal and informal, meaning like formal is going to be more like your straight lines on everything, and you have like rows of plantings. Where you're informal, you have more curvilinear, your plantings are a little bit more kind of mixed. You're still going by size and height and things, but it's a little bit more loose. It doesn't feel as like boxy. Either way works. It just kind of is a personal preference on what you want to do. My designs, I have done more of an informal look. So you can always make it look a little bit more formal by doing just kind of like rows and doing squares and things. When I did, I kind of did more straight lines, but then I made the landscape more informal. So you can kind of mix it up, whatever, it kind of just depends on your preference. Again, we have our different size lots, and I'll show you all the examples that I've made with these. So we have the regular, like rectangular lots, corner lots, and then our odd shaped ones. You want to remember to remember to leave plenty of space between the property line and the central open shape. You don't want to like have your central open shape going like up to the fence, especially in the backyard. If it lines up with your sidewalk in the front yard, I've seen a lot of examples like that, and that's usually totally fine. But in the backyard, you do want to make sure that there's enough space that you can put plants in there. You don't want it to be any less than 8 feet wide, and you want your corners, you don't want any corners less than 90 degrees. So no weird squiggly lines, no really teeny tiny corners. We're keeping it all either If we're doing curvilinear, it's going to be long swooping curves, or for more angular, we're keeping everything within 90 degrees or more. Your squares and your rectangles are going to be the most efficient, right? Because your sprinkler systems will be a little bit, it'll be easier to set up your sprinkler systems to fit that. But curvilinear is something that's really popular, and you can make those work as well. And again, remember, you don't have to do long for your central open shape. If you'd rather just do like a nice gravel pad, you can do that. That's totally fine. It's all pretty much personal preference on what you want to do. You just want to make sure if you do gravel, that you want the surrounding landscape to look different than your gravel pads. You want that to be a specific central open shape, and then have good plantings all around, so that it's a difference, so that you have that kind of negative space. Again, you have your lawn alternatives. So if you want an area, if there's an area where you're like, I really want this to be central open shape, but it's really small, and I want it to be plant life, I don't want to put gravel, there are lawn alternatives. So your creeping thyme, Turkish veronica for shade. Thyme does really well in the sun. There are some other ground covers that'll work, that kind of give that lawn type of a look. So it's example time now. This is the fun part. So I'm gonna, let's see, stop sharing, switch my camera. Okay, so we're back to our example here, right? This is why I love trace paper, is because now I'm gonna put my trace paper over my conceptual design, and I can see my conceptual design underneath there, right? I can see, okay, there's my general areas of where I want everything, but now I can draw on top of those areas. So now, I'm going to start out with my central open shape. So I have this one here and this one in the back. So this one here, we have kind of this awkward walking area right here that makes it just a little bit weird to deal with. So what I've decided to do let's see. So I'm going to do more of straight lines for my central open shape for this example. I'll show you some other ones after we've finished everything that's a little bit different. What we're going to do, I'm going to keep this area. Let's see. So I want a little bit of plant life over here, but I want my central open shape kind of in this area. So I'm not going to like do anything weird over here, because if I put the central open shape over here, then you have this random area that's going to be kind of difficult to work with. So I'm going to make it in line with my walking area. I'm going to bring it over here. Let's do a straight down line right there. And then I'm going to leave space over here for a plant bed. So now I have my central open shape in the front yard. And in the back, I'm going to pretty much just do it in the same spot right here. We're probably going to take out a little bit with our gathering area, but that will be okay. I'm just going to do it like this. So like that. Perfect. Okay, so there's that too.
Sorry, while she's drawing this, just remember, you should be considering these. And this is not rocket science. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to have everything even perfect at this stage. So some of you may feel a little paralyzed to know, oh no, what do I do? And now how big? Just go start drawing things, and then you can make modifications. This whole thing, every step of the way here, you can make modifications as you go.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to show you on my scale where, oh man, I've made a mess. Okay, so on my scale right here, this spot that I have right here, that's 5 feet for me. So using that, I'm going to come on here and be like, okay, 5 feet, 5 feet. So from there to there, so at this point, that's 10 feet. 10 feet. So this is about 25 feet wide. If that's too big for you, you can always modify it like Dave said. Also, it's a good idea to have this like taped down. I don't have tape with me, so it's kind of moving around, but taping it down is really helpful. So that's our central open shapes. Again, like Dave said, it doesn't need to be perfect. So let's stop right there. Are there any questions about central open shapes related to either the concept or just them in general? Or are we all good with that?
There may be a question here, a couple of them, and maybe you can see the questions or we'll just answer them.
Yeah, I can see them here. So we have.
With Karen on transition from paths, we're going to get to that in just a minute, Karen. And I'll type in a thing for transition of pathways, but I think Karen had a question about the open shapes as well as Emily. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so how do we decide the ratio of open shape to the rest of the landscape? So we talked about this in the other one. It should be around 20 to 30% of your total landscaped area. So for this corner lot, let's see, the total area, if you want to be really specific, you can go by that. So like 20 to 30%. You can also, I don't know, like you can make it look pretty much like it does. I don't think it needs to be that specific that you're like, I can't do 35%. Like it's pretty much, you just don't want lawn to be the main part of your landscape, right? Like these central open shapes, they're not the main part of our landscape. They're just a small part and they're not taking up too much room. They're not unusable areas. So 20 to 30% is kind of the ratio depending on your other like parts of your landscape. But I don't think you need to be like that super duper specific. As long as your lawn is not taking up most of your landscape, right? You can check out the area of your lot, find it out, length times width or whatever, get a general idea, and then do it based on that. But as far as like looks go, I think that this would be about that, depending on like if we're going by the ratio. I hope that helps, Emily. And then Karen, yours is similar. So you have a large lot, so 12,600 square feet. Considering making the central open shape more than 35%, do you think that will work okay? So again, like I said, it's pretty much personal preference. We do recommend it being 20 to 30%. 35% is not going to be horrible. But I mean, it just goes on how much water you wanted to conserve, right? So this is kind of a personal preference. Again, like we teach the Localscape program classes and things, but it all depends on you. It is a great way to conserve water and to create a landscape that looks really beautiful. That's the design is specified for Utah, right? But if you have an area where, like, I don't know, like I have a friend that he has a spot in his yard that he has planted. It's almost the size of a football field. He has it planted all with lawn, because him and his family, very often, he has 12 children, I think, and it's very often that they are outside playing football. So he has that big football field for that specifically. It's definitely more than what he should have his lawn if we're going by Localscape standards, but he's using that to that point, right? So kind of a personal preference. Emily, let's see, she has a funny shaped yard, and
a large chunk of the yard is out on the sides. She wants to look visually appealing walking out into the backyard. So I'm glad that that helped. Yeah, it's hard with these funny shaped. I have some examples of like the angular shaped lots that like it looks funny. So sometimes you just got to kind of go with the flow of the weird shaped lawns and lots and yards. It just sometimes you just got to work around it, which is hard, but that's why we're in this class, right? Okay, so that's central open shapes. Let's go back to my presentation. Maybe. There we go. Okay. So now, oh wait, so yeah, so here's our central open shapes on our 3D model, right? So they have them all made there. Next are our gathering areas. Again, it's a good idea to make a list of gathering areas that you want if you have specifics in mind. Here's some ideas of what things can look like. Here's our gathering areas with our different lots. Here's our considerations again, because you want to think of that when you have your gathering areas, right? And then the usage as well. I'm going to do gathering areas, activity zones, and pathways, and then we're going to do them all together as me showing you them. So I'm not going to do an example right now. We're just going to move on because it's good if you do them all together because they all kind of relate to one another. So here's our gathering areas in relation to our 3D model. So next are your activity zones. Again, it's good to have a list of things that you want to put in. If you want to have a cool water feature, have that on your list. If you want a basketball court, put it on your list. It's good to have those things in mind so that you can either make the space for it or plan to have that in that space, right? Because you want to make sure that you have enough room or that it's in the right spot with sun exposure or whatever, right? So make sure to have a list of things that you're wanting. Here's some, yes.
Let me add too, some of you, if you're, you may be doing this over a phased approach over time. This plan will help with that. So if you know you want something, but it's going to be a year or two out, well, you're still putting this in your plan. And maybe for a while, that's going to just be grass or you leave it empty. And then, as you do one piece at a time, you can go back and reference this plan and know, oh, I shouldn't have planted that tree there, 3 years ago because I knew I wanted something else. So this will just help you plan for whatever's coming as you're doing a phased approach, because not everybody can do their whole yard all at once.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Dave. Yeah. Doing a whole landscape sometimes is really daunting. So doing it step by step is something that is definitely doable, right? If you think about it that way. So yeah, definitely if you're wanting to do this more in like a step-by-step process, if you're like, I'm just going to do this section of the yard this year, just do that. But at least you have this plan that you can say, eventually, I'm going to have a pool right here. Eventually, I'm going to have a play area right here. But you don't have to do it all at once because it can be really overwhelming to think about doing your entire landscape all in 1 year. So yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up, Dave. Here's our considerations again for our activity zones, the same pretty much as gathering areas. And we're not doing an example because I'll hurry and go through pathways and then we'll do an example. Here's our locations and with our 3D model. They don't have any activity zones in the front, but let's see. So then our pathways, those are all our connections. We'll talk about those transitions so you can kind of see like how you transition that. I mean, you can see from these examples kind of the transitions that they have. And then here's their pathways connecting on our different lots. Again, you want to make sure you're using correct material for the different types of pathways, your primary and your secondary pathways. All right, so now we're going to go back to our example. If I can figure out how to, oh, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Go and stop share. Okay, so here's our example. Again, we need to do our gathering areas, our activity zones, and our pathways, right? So, my pencil. So let's see, our gathering area right here is our kind of back patio type of area, right? And since we have a square shaped central open shape, I think it would look nice if we had kind of more of a rounded patio. So I'm going to do kind of this shape of patio, right? So that means this corner of central open shape is gone. And then I have our other gathering areas, and it'll kind of depend on you if you're wanting to put material underneath like your seating areas. Some seating areas I'm not going to put material underneath because it's just going to be like a bench underneath a tree. But then in some areas I am going to put some material under. So this, for this little gathering area, I'm just going to do a simple bench. Again, like the placing of this bench is really going to depend on what I decide to do with plants. I just know that in that general area, I'm wanting a bench there, and I need a pathway leading to that. So when it comes to the actual putting it into the landscape, it might end up being a little bit different than the plan. And guess what? That's okay. Totally fine. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to have a little bench in here. It's a bench. And then in this corner, we have a fence right here on this existing landscape. So I'm going to actually do a little material right there, and then say I'm going to put a little bench in here. If I want that to be tables or I want it to be a couple chairs, that's totally fine. But I know for my purposes, that means I have a gathering area there and I have different material there than dirt. Over here, I'm just going to do a little bench right here. And then over here, I've decided I don't want my gathering area on that side. I want it over here. So I'm going to put a little different material there, and then have a little bench or table or whatever. I just know for now that's a gathering spot. That's going to be nice and secluded in there, right? Nice. So those are my gathering areas. So next I need to do my activity zones. So I have this corner here. You can do, this is going to be my fire pit. So you can do it based on how you want to do it. I think it would be really cool for my purposes because we have our fence right here. I think it'd be cool if we did kind of like a curved look for my fire pit area. So then we would have our little fire pit right here. Here's our little chairs. Right? So maybe that changes in the future, right? Maybe I'm like, actually, I want that to be a square. You can change it to be a square on your design, or you can just do it as a square in your yard. You can kind of map it out and go outside and kind of see how it's going to look and then decide whether or not that's actually the shape you want. It's pretty changeable, pretty malleable. You can pretty much change it to the way you want it to be. And then our sandbox area. So keep in mind, we have this tree. It probably has a pretty good trunk right there, right? I'm going to have my sandbox area actually look pretty similar to that. I'm going to have a straight line on this side. And I'm going to just do, I'm actually going to cut into my central open shape a little bit. And do that. Maybe that sandbox area is too big. So then I go and I change it. But for now, that kind of looks cool to me. I think that's kind of fun. I don't know, I might change it later. I might make my central open shape a little bit smaller so that we have more of a pathway in between it. It's all pretty much dependent on what you want to do. Over here, I'm going to have our potential for a vegetable garden. So I'm probably going to do raised beds just to show that vegetable garden. I don't have to have them be raised beds, but that at least shows me, oh, that's going to be my potential vegetable garden, right? Wonderful. So now we need to kind of put a look of how our pathways are going to go. So I have a pathway in between my central open shape to the fire pit, probably. We can maybe even integrate a pathway. Let's see, so this will kind of depend. I've decided I'm just going to do a pathway off of our patio. So I'm going to do a pathway like that. I need a pathway from here to the fence. I need a pathway going from here over to my central open shape. But I also need it to connect to this, so I'm going to make it kind of like start the pathway here. And then I'm going to kind of weave it in between things here so that it creates some interest when you're walking that pathway. Again, this isn't like perfect, doesn't have to be. Let's see. So then we have this area over here. So I'm going to do my pathway connecting there. And then if we have the door to the fence, like right here, then you can just walk on that to get into there. And then we need a pathway connecting to this seating area over here. And we also need to connect to our open, like that. Again, these pathways aren't perfect. They don't need to be perfect right now. And they're probably not going to be perfect when you put them in either. It's not, it's like Dave said, it's not rocket science. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, so those are all of our pathways, central open shape, gathering areas, activity zones. We have them all in a place now, and everything around that is going to be our planting beds. So let's go back to my presentation. And is there any specific questions about the rest of those? I'm not seeing any coming into the Q&A box. Are we good? Everyone kind of doing okay? I know this is it's pretty fast paced. But again, you can reference this with the recording. So it's going to be a little bit easier to be able to go back and watch and get an idea of what you want to do, and then go back and watch and press pause and whatever you want to do. If there's no questions, then we'll move on. We good? I think we are. Okay. So next are our plantings, right? This is, I mean, to be honest, this is kind of hard. It's hard to decide what you're going to be doing, especially when you have plants there already. But I'm going to show you examples of what you can do if you have plants there already, or if you're starting with a brand new slate, right? So the first thing you want to start with is your trees. So we have our trees highlighted here. It's taken, the black is all the other elements, the Localscape elements. So it's taken our trees, it's showing you where all of your trees are. Those are like, those are the first thing you want to do, just because they can change the area so much with the amount of shade or the size of them, right? Next are your foundation plants. Those are going to be like the ones right up against your house, ones that are going to be hiding your like the edge of your house. You're going to just like put those on there so that it kind of softens it up a little bit. Then your perimeter plants, those are going to be those around your landscape. If you're wanting more privacy, those are the things you're going to be wanting to put there. Next are your infill plants, the rest of them that kind of go into your landscape. And then your park strip will be last. Your park strip is, I mean, it's a good thing to do last, just because you can make it match everything else. With using similar plants, you don't have to use like everything exactly the same, but you can use similar plants so that it kind of matches everything else. So the first thing is you want to make sure that you're designing based on the mature size that the tree is going to get. So you can get this tiny little tree right at the nursery. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay that small size. You want to make sure that you're checking the plant tags. I think it talks about this in here at some point. They're going to tell you what the mature size is going to be. So like, make sure you're checking your trees. If it's eventually going to be 20 feet, plan for that 20-foot width. You may like have to change plant material over time underneath it, depending on that, because maybe it's not that big when you first get it, right? So if you have shade plants underneath this tree that doesn't provide the shade needed, they're all going to get crispy fried. So maybe have plants there, and then when the tree starts getting bigger and providing more shade, then you can switch out the plants. Make sure you're doing that with your shrubs as well. A lot of people think that they can buy a shrub and then just trim it back to the size that they want it to be. But usually it's best to go off of the mature size of the shrub, because some shrubs especially don't like to be cut back. And if you plan for that size, then you don't have to cut it back, and it's a lot easier maintenance for you. And then perennials, they're typically in like 1 to 2 feet. So you do want to plan for them, but I don't know, it just kind of depends on how densely you're wanting to plant them and things. I don't worry too much about perennials, just because if they're perennials that get to be a little bit bigger, that's when I usually like will plan for sure around them. But perennials, I feel like are, I mean, you can tell pretty much a foot, right? It's not rocket science. Again, like, you don't have to place everything perfectly and have it all perfect. You do want to make sure that you're keeping your shrubs, grasses, and trees to mature size, but then your perennials, you can kind of base that off of how much room you have left in a perennial section, right? Use your plant tags. That's something that's really important. This tells you how much light it needs, when it blooms, how much water it needs, how big and how wide it's going to get, and then the zone. So make sure that you're looking at those plant tags when you go to the nursery. You find a plant and you're like, man, this is really pretty. I only have 3 feet. And you look on the back and it says that it gets to be 6 foot tall and wide. Not going to work. Sometimes a lot of shrubs do have different varieties and things that stay smaller. It really depends. But maybe you'd be able to find something similar that would stay smaller and fit in that size. You want to make sure that you're planting in layers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like this, like rows and lines, but you do want to keep in mind, like site-wise, how it's going to look. So, I mean, for me, I do more of like informal plantings is usually my style that I decide that I like to do. I can do this kind of a look, but I do like the informal look, but I still do keep it in mind that when I look at an area, I want to see this kind of line moving upwards. I don't want it to all be flat. I don't want there to be like randomness, like a random super tall thing in the front and then tiny perennials in the back that no one can see, right? So I keep it in mind. But you do want to plant in layers. So that's kind of an example. So this is an informal design right here. But you can see that they've planted in layers. They have tall thing in the back. They have medium-sized things kind of in the middle. And then they have their short things in the front. And the medium-sized things they've mixed up. There's a medium-sized grass. There's a medium-sized bush. There's a little bit taller of a perennial. And then they have shorter perennials, right? They've planted in those layers, but it's a little bit more informal. Maintenance is something that you do want to consider when you're thinking about your plants. A low density planting for sure is going to be less maintenance. High density plantings is a lot more. I mean, this planting on the right, it's beautiful, right? Super pretty. That's something like all those perennials are going to have to be cut back in the fall or the spring. Just kind of keep that in mind. If that's something you're fine doing, because usually it's like a twice a year thing. Like either you cut back all your perennials in the fall, or you wait and then you do it in the spring. So it kind of just depends on how much maintenance you're wanting to put forth. Depends on the plant that you get also. It's just kind of your own personal preference. Some principles when you're thinking about your planting design is like the function of them. Like plants, you do want them to have a purpose. So what are you trying to do with these plants? Is it to create a feeling of like you want it to feel peaceful and quiet, or you want it to be really bright and fun? Are you trying to have a lot of plants for pollinators? Are you trying to have plants that like discourage deer in your yard? Are you trying to have a really like fun experience for kids? Are you wanting to keep people out of your yard? So you're going to put some more like pokey things around your around like the perimeter of your yard so people aren't coming into your yard. So that's kind of something to think about. And then do you want like different attributes for different areas? So like, are you wanting a certain sitting area to feel a certain way? Do you want it to like, do you want to have pokey things around the sandbox where your kids play? I wouldn't think so, right? So what do you want for each of the areas? What kind of layout techniques do you want to apply into your landscapes, right? So you want to make sure that you're thinking about these things when you're planting. So first your trees, and we'll go through this with our example. Again, like they largely impact what's around them, and they're the biggest things. So you do want to do them first. Good things about trees, like they provide shade, they can block unwanted views, they can have like interest through different seasons. So if you have something that blooms in the spring and then it's green in the summer, and then it can have a fall color, or it just has a really nice fall color and just looks really nice and green for the rest of the year. They have multiple functions. They can create microclimates, which a microclimate is a place that it kind of creates a different climate for the area that it's in, right? So the fact that a tree can provide a ton of shade, that's going to create a different spot. You can't do the same plants there. It can also kind of protect plants underneath from snowfall. So it can be a little bit different in that wise. So kind of keep those things in mind when you're thinking about trees and thinking about the plants that you're going to put underneath them. Let's see, so we have our tree here in our yard. They're going to be putting a gathering area and a pathway, I believe, underneath it. Yeah. So they have this little pathway here, and then they've planned all these plants. So they have like, that looks like a hydrangea. They have some dogwoods, and then they have a ground cover that's probably Turkish Veronica. And it looks like some lady's mantle. Those are all things that can tolerate shade, but also could take a little bit of sun. So making sure to plan around that tree if it's an existing tree or if you're wanting to put a tree in there. Trees are nice because they can provide good, like, they have a passive solar on here, so that means like it like can cool your house down in the summer because of the shade that it provides to your house, and in the winter it can help heat up your home because there's no leaves on the tree that the leaves fall off, right? If it's an evergreen, then it's going to provide shade all year round. But that's something to think about. Like if you have an area in your home, especially on the south facing side of your yard, it's usually a really good idea to have trees in the front because it makes the front of your house super duper hot in the summer. So it can help with your energy bills. Having those trees there can really decrease how much air conditioning that you're using in your home. Guidelines with trees: they need to be located outside of the lawn. It becomes like a barrier to your sprinklers when you have it in the middle of your lawn, and then it's competing with the grass as well. So it's best to not have them in the lawn. You do want them at least 5 to 6 feet away from your fence line. It's best if you are designing them next to your gathering areas or your activity zones, right? To provide that shade. And then thinking about your activity zones and gathering areas, if you have trees already, think about putting them near those trees. Like we we have in our example there. And then also you want to make sure that you're following your city's ordinances for park strip trees. Some cities don't allow trees in the park strips. Some of them only allow certain trees. So making sure that you're checking your city's ordinance for that if you're wanting to do trees in your park strip. As far as arrangement goes, if you're wanting to kind of create a focal point with a tree that has special features, so there's some trees that are really unique looking. Some of your like weeping spruces look really cool. Weeping cherry trees look really cool. There's some smaller like flowering trees that end up just staying kind of small. You can create that into a focal point or something. If the tree has a really specific special feature about it, you can create a focal point with that tree, planting only that single tree in an area. That's where everyone's eye is going to look, right? You can plant flowering trees around your yard, different ones even, to provide color and interest throughout your yard. And then evergreens are a great way to create year-round interest and privacy. So, I mean, your deciduous trees, your flowering trees, those are going to lose their leaves in the fall, right? Like your evergreens aren't. So if you're wanting an area to stay private for the whole year, plant evergreens around it, right? Or have something with really dense branches to kind of help provide that screen. Oh my, it's gonna underline all of these things. Okay, so like this is our focal point plant here. It's a weeping spruce, really cool looking plant. They have that planted there as someone like, so that the eye goes towards that tree. And they have some nice plantings around it, but it's created a focal point for that area. Here's our different examples of flowering trees around the yard that they've used. And then there are evergreens around. This is like the one on the left. That could also be considered also a focal point. It's just really unique. It's just not one that you see a lot, and it creates a really cool look. So here's our 3D example. They've put in their trees. Looks nice. So now is our example time. Some questions again that you need to think about when you're putting in your trees. What's the purpose of those trees? Is it to create shade? Is it to create a screen? Create something pretty for you to look at outside your window? How are you going to arrange them? So then the instructions for this, we're going to apply the trees around the perimeter of the landscape, moving inward, and then placing the trees where you want them. And then deciding how to use the trees that are existing, how to use that shade from those trees. So we're going to go back to, let's see, stopping my share. So back to our example here. At this point, it kind of starts to get a little bit messy with pencil, so I like to change to pen. You don't have to, but that's just what I like to do. I have another piece of trace paper right here. So now I can see, or actually, we can take our conceptual design out of here. So now I'm going to layer this one on here. Okay, I'm going to put this one on top. Perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do, so I would suggest having 2 different types of markers or pens or whatever to specify between things, because then it makes it easier for you to understand. So for our big trees, I'm using a Sharpie, like this big end of the Sharpie. I'm going to do my existing trees really fast. Just hurry and show where those are. Again, this doesn't need to be perfect. My circles are not perfect. You can use your circle template if you want to, this little thing. I didn't for those just because I didn't. Okay, so I've drawn in where our existing trees are. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, where do I want some other trees? Let's see, find my plan that I made here. Here we go. So I probably want to add some evergreen trees. I like evergreens personally. I think they look really nice. Let's see. So I have this little corner right here that looks like it needs something. It looks like it could use some height. It would be nice if it was something evergreen to kind of create that year-round interest. So I'm going to put an evergreen tree in this corner right by my activity zone. I don't want to be too close so that the kids like get poked, but I'm going to put it there. Let's see, I'll use my circle template. I'll be good. I'll use this. Also, keep in mind of the size. So I have my scale right here. Again, remember that is 5 feet. That's 10 feet. So most evergreens you'll want to plan. I mean, you can get some smaller evergreens. I'm planning on it being more than 10 feet. So I'm going to do this size. That's how I use a circle template. It's easy. I kind of just like freehanding my plants just because it's easier for me to feel like I can just kind of do it. And then you do want to use different symbols for different things to make it make sense to you. That's what I use for my evergreens, is kind of that pokey looking thing. That's how I distinguish them from other trees. Okay, so I have that evergreen there. I'm looking around the rest of my landscape right now. Am I wanting to put any other evergreens anywhere else? Again, we have this fence here, right? I think it'd look nice to have an evergreen up next to the fence, kind of block that look of the fence, but have it still kind of looking over here. So I'm going to put another evergreen over here. Right, that looks nice. So now I'm moving inwards. Do I want any other evergreen trees kind of closer? So I have this kind of open area over here. I think it would look nice to have kind of a focal point evergreen right here. I have my central open shape, but I can move my central open shape over a little bit. So I've decided I'm going to do that. I'm going to have an evergreen tree right here. That means my central open shape. I'm going to grab my pencil. I'm just going to make my central open shape just a little bit smaller. Totally fine, right? We still have a pretty good size there. That looks nice. All right, so those are evergreen trees. I probably want to add some flowering trees as well to create some interest. So, especially on this pathway, it's going to look really pretty if we have some flowering trees, and then it'll also help create interest around the street and things. So I'm going to do a flowering tree right here. Most flowering trees are in a range of like around 15 to 20 feet. So I'm going to kind of plan on that. So I have my scale here. So that's 10 feet right there. So that'd be radius 10 feet, 10 feet. I'm going to do it more like 15 feet. You can see my circles aren't perfect, and that's okay.
Diane, this may be a good time. There was a question from one of our attendees about scale and spacing, that they get a little paralyzed on, when you're putting plants in a landscape, when you're kind of doing this step of adding plants, to know the mature size and how to scale that appropriately. We had some examples on the Localscape website on the park strip that have some scales, but not on the larger planning. And so I thought that would be, this is probably a good time to discuss that if you want to, or I can.
Yeah. So as far as like, I'm going to read the.
It's from Lewis.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, so we talked a little bit about scale at the very beginning. So good way to start with scale is to figure out the scale of your landscape, right? So I have this example right here that I figured out the scale. So this side of the yard is 112 feet. I took that off of Google Maps. I did the distance thing, so I measured what it was. So if I know that that's 112 feet, I come in here and I say, okay, so I'm going to see where it goes on my scale. So 112 feet is about 8 inches on my scale. So I know, so you can see my math over here. It's super professional. It's not, it's fine. So 112 feet is about 8 inches. So then that means 56 feet is about 4 inches. 28 feet is about 2 inches. 14 feet is about 1 inch. 7 feet is about 0.5 inches. So that's kind of how I based my scale. So now that I know that 7 feet is about 1/2 inch, I have my 1/2 inch mark right here. That is about 7 feet. I know that. So now I have my evergreen tree here. There's my 7-foot mark, so I know it's at least 7 feet. And then based on this being 7 feet, we don't have a full complete another 1/2 inch here. So it's like, it's just over 10 feet, right? It might be like 11 feet, 12 feet. I mean, it's something that you can, it doesn't need to be perfect in your design, but when you go out there and you're actually measuring the places that you're putting the plants, that's when you want to get more specific. And if you have to adjust your plants based on that, that's just fine. With your big trees and stuff, it is a little bit more important that you're planning an area for that size of the tree. So going out there with like a ruler, or not a ruler, that would take forever. No, getting some sort of like, they have, what are those things, Dave, where you like can roll up the thing, I don't know why I can't think of it. It's like a tape.
Oh yeah,
like a measuring tape.
Yeah, you just got your measuring tape, or there's wheel measures that measure.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's those ones that are more flexible that you can take around your yard and kind of measure out spaces and make it more specific that way. But when you're drawing, you can kind of be a little bit more loose. You don't have to have exact measurements on your drawing, as long as it's in kind of the ballpark. Exact measurements is going to come when you have that plant and you're actually going to be like killing your grass. You're going to say, okay, I want my grass area. This is the general area, but this is actually how big of an area that I need. So it might be a little bit different than your plan, but the plan doesn't need to be super duper like specific. Do you think that answered the question okay, Dave?
Yeah, and I may add, and I'm not sure if it was, the question is dealing with the scale on paper or knowing, okay, I want an evergreen tree. How do I know how big that's actually going to get? So maybe for anybody else that's struggling with that, this is where doing just a couple little Google searches, or if you're in a nursery, look at that plant tag, because if it says it'll get 10 feet wide, then don't just think, well, it's so cute in this little pot, maybe it won't get that big. No, it'll probably get that big. So plan, if on your plan you have an evergreen, but remember, your plan is, it's a plan, but it can be modified. So if you have a place for an evergreen tree and in your scale on your paper, you're thinking, okay, I've got 10 feet diameter space here. Well, then when you're shopping for an evergreen, make sure that it's going to fit in that space. Don't buy, you know, a blue spruce, a standard blue spruce, because that thing is going to get 60 feet tall and 20 feet wide, you know. So just if you have that in your mind, you'll be able to fit whatever plant type you want. And that's why we don't get in this design step, we don't get into really specific plant variety choices, because you're going to want to choose those varieties for yourself, and you're going to know what needs to fit in certain spaces. So we're just trying to help you understand the space. I've got 10 feet diameter here for a tree, or I've got a 20-foot diameter canopy area, you know, and it can be 30 feet tall and 20 feet wide. If you've got that in your mind, then you've got lots and lots of options for the plant that will fit there.
Exactly. Yeah, I hope that helps, Lewis. It can get a little bit overwhelming, but yeah, I hope that was helpful. Let's answer.
If there's follow-up questions for that, certainly ask them.
Yes.
And we still got a lot of time to discuss a lot of things of how to put these all together and help you. But yeah, remember, your design is a design. It's a guide. If you know, landscape designers and architects, they may have they're really familiar with sizes, and they have their plant palette. They know how big those plants are going to get. So they may draw very specific circles, you know, that are a certain size. For you, for you know, an average homeowner like yourself, you're designing this yourself. You don't need that level of detail or that level of specificity. You know, you're not so worried. Oh no, this circle is a little bigger than I think I need. You're just getting yourself a plan. You're understanding how this should look. You kind of visualize it in your mind, and then it can kind of be modified. Even the plant selection, if you have a specific plant in mind, but then it's not available, the nursery, you're able to substitute because you're planning for the space, not specific plants necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up too. Yeah. Because you're just putting general size, not specific plants right now. We're thinking, I want a flowering tree here, but you're not thinking, I want this specific type of crabapple. Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up, Dave. So there's a question that came in here. I'll let you answer that, Dave. Typing the answer. Okay. So that's what I've decided to do with my trees. So I have my base trees all put in there. I did decide to put an evergreen tree here. That means I'm going to have to kind of modify this pathway, but guess what? That's okay, because we can modify it. It'll be fine. Next, let's see. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so next we're going to get into our foundation plants. So these are the ones that are going to be around your house again, remember? So these are going to be hiding your foundation. It can soften the edges of your house. It can frame windows. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about where your windows are. So I'm going to I'll show you how I like make little, you can label your windows in whatever way you find is easiest. I'll show you how I do mine. You want to make sure they have multiple season interests. They're the backbone of your planting design. So they do create kind of more of a backbone type of a look. It also ties the house into your landscape so that your house doesn't look kind of random with the rest of your landscape. It can include ornamental grasses, shrubs, taller perennials. Taller perennials meaning perennials that are at least 3 feet tall. You want to stay within 6 feet of the foundation for your foundation plants. And you want to use plants that are shorter than 15 feet. So you're not wanting to put like gigantic deciduous trees right next to your house. You do want them to stay smaller. There are some flowering trees that get smaller. So if you want a flowering tree closer to your house, there are some that do stay shorter and stay kind of more smaller too. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there are options. They're going to underline things. I think that's funny. Evergreens are good to create year-round interest. Your grasses, they can create year-round interest as well, because not only do they look good when they're green, but in the fall time, they usually have really nice fall colors, and then they can create interest during the winter as well, if you decide to keep them up. Dwarf trees can be used, but they should be more narrow and should stay shorter, right? So a dwarf tree, if you get a dwarf version of like a gigantic evergreen tree, dwarf usually still means that it's going to be like 20 feet, right? So making sure that you have the size of that tree at the right thing. If you want a smaller tree there, make sure you get a smaller tree to go there. It is smart to repeat similar plant colors throughout your landscape. So if you have, like, for example, these blue junipers, you're not going to be putting those everywhere else in your landscape. Maybe like you could use some, but if you have that blue color in other plants around your landscape, if you use some different evergreens that are that same kind of blue color, it helps kind of tie in the colors. So using similar colors, you want to design with your foliage rather than your flowers. Usually for foundation plants, it's more like shrubs and things. You can have flowering things, but you do want there to be interest. So you want to make sure that their foliage looks really nice as well. Odd numbers is something that's pretty popular for people to do with foundation plants and things. It's a personal preference, I think. Sometimes I don't do odd numbers. So it kind of just depends on you. You want to make sure that you're using shorter shrubs in front of your windows so that you're not blocking your views. And you want to make sure that, like, if you're putting shrubs next to your windows to frame the window, that those shrubs are not going to be growing over. You see all the time with older homes where there's like shrub on half the side of the window and you can't even see out the window. It kind of makes it not really usable. So here is an example of the foundation plants on our, what did I do? There we go. On our 3D example there. So in thinking about your foundation plants, where are you going to need that year-round interest? Where do you want to add more kind of foliage color? So on this example, they have darker foliage colors and they have the brighter foliage colors. It creates a great contrast between the two. It looks really cool, right? And then how are you going to arrange them? This is also, I think, a personal preference. Is it going to be more formal? Or are you going to be doing more lines? Or are you going to be doing more of like an informal look? I'm going to be doing more informal. For my example, so first you want to start by placing the taller shrubs closest to the house, framing the windows, and then placing the shorter plants below the windows. So I'm going to do example. Let's see. So stop sharing now. Good. So first I'm going to show you kind of how I represent everything. So I have a pathway here. This goes to a door. So that's my kind of door symbol. We have a door coming out here to the back, and my garage. I do kind of garages like this. You can do windows similar to that, but I'm going to use just little arrows. So there's a window here. Also, I don't know this house super well, so I'm kind of guessing, but we're going to guess based on what I think that it would be like, right? With your own house, it's a little bit easier because you know where the windows are. But making sure that you're labeling those windows. So I think there's probably a couple bedrooms here. There's probably a window at the back over here, maybe one here. I'm sure there's one in the back here. There's probably one next to the door. Probably the kitchen is over here. Might be a bedroom over here. And then usually garages have like a little window right there. Okay. So there's kind of where our windows are. So now we're going to be doing our foundation plants. Let's see. So I'm going to start with this little space. We have this kind of like random plant bed that was already there. So I'm going to put a shrub right here. It can be a little bit of a taller shrub. If we're measuring that, that's going to be about 5 feet wide. So making sure that we're finding something around that size, that mature size. And then I think I'm going to do some grasses, because usually windows in front of your house, there's usually like I think it's about 4 feet between the ground and the window, usually is what it what it tends to be like. So make sure you're measuring that on your own house, but that's typical. So I'm going to use a grass because they kind of help give a really good look and it hides the foundation really well. So I'm going to do 3 grasses right here. So grasses are usually 2 to 3 feet wide. So if I'm using my scale here, that's 5 foot. So 3 foot's probably going to be about that wide. Around there. So that's about the size of my grass. I'm going to do 3 right here. I think that looks nice. I'm going to use this symbol for my grasses. Simple. And then let's keep moving. So since I put grasses here, I'm going to tie in those grasses by putting some other grasses over here that'll kind of help soften this corner a little bit. So let's put some grasses here. I'm going to do it in the planting kind of like this because we have room. Next, I'm going to do some shrubs. I have the window right there. So I'm going to maybe do like a tall, skinny shrub in this corner. And then I'm going to do maybe another tall and skinny shrub in the middle. And then on this corner, I'm going to do, we have our little bench right here, remember? I'm going to actually draw it on here so you can see a little better. I'm going to do an evergreen behind the bench, an evergreen shrub. And making sure that there's space for that window to be seen. There are evergreen shrubs that stay smaller. So we're going to make sure that that evergreen's not taller than you can see out the window. We want to make sure that these ones stay shorter. And so now that we have that, let's see, we can probably put some grasses in the middle there. This is personal preference. I think that it'll look nice. I'm not actually going to do one right here. It's because I can fill that area in with some, maybe some taller perennials. Moving on. So now we have this side of the yard. We have a tree right here. Well, that doesn't mean that I can't put a shrub underneath. I'm going to do a little shrub. It's kind of hard to see when you have things. A really good way to do this, you can put another trace paper on top. I could have taken another trace paper and then put my shrubs and things next, and then it makes it easier for your people to read. But personal preference, it doesn't really matter what way you decide to do it, as long as you understand how it's going to look. Okay, so now we have our sitting area over here. I'm going to put an evergreen shrub right here to kind of give some interest, and to help tie that one in, I'm going to do another evergreen shrub that's the same on this side because we have our little seating area right here underneath the window. Okay, let's move to the backyard. So I have this tree here. I wanted that tree to be a little bit closer to the house. So I'm going to make a note. That tree I want to kind of be more over there. So that means our pathway here is going to go more like that. So there's room for this tree. So now I just need to put some things here. We're keeping in mind that this area of the yard is going to be a little bit more shady too. So that's going to depend, or that's going to kind of change what plant material you'll do back there, because you want something with a little bit more shade. So I'm keeping that in mind. There's not a ton of like shrubs that do super well with shade. So I'm maybe going to think of something. So like for me, in my head, I'm thinking hostas get really big. They're bigger perennials. You can get some bigger ones. They'd be really good in that area. So I'm going to say some hostas here. Usually I'm not specific with plants, but since this is a special area, hostas for that one. And then our tree is going to take up that corner. So we don't need to worry about that corner there. We're going to move over here. This is still really shady on this area. So I'm going to make it pretty similar. I'm going to put hostas again in this area. Help soften that edge. We have our vegetable garden over here, so we don't really need to worry about that. And then we have this part. I think it would look nice if we put a nice little shrub right here. And then that's pretty much our foundation plantings. So let's stop there. Are there any questions about foundation plantings specifically that anyone's having right now? I think we're good.
Yeah, I don't see any questions right now.
Sweet. Okay, then we're going to keep going. Okay, so next are your perimeter plants. So those are the ones around the perimeter of your yard. It's pretty much the same. They're the backbone of your planting. They do like define the sides and back property boundaries. So they're good like definer plants. They add height to your landscape. They can act as a privacy screen. Again, you want them to have multi-season interest. Oh, they're gonna underline things. I think that's so funny. We already talked about this. It's the backbone of your landscape. It creates that year-round interest, so that's why it's the backbone. It kind of like holds everything in place. It can act as a fence for your landscape, adds height to an area. You can use shrubs, grasses, perennials. If you use perennials, you do want them to be at least 3 feet tall. There are some perennials that get to be pretty big. You'll just want to kind of keep that in mind on what you want to do in your yard. You do want to echo like similar plant colors around your yard. You can also use similar plants as well. You can design with foliage color rather than flowers. So, I mean, there's lots of barberries that have different colors. There's lots of 9-barks with different colors. Just kind of keeping that in mind. You don't have to do flowers for colors. Again, grouping in odd numbers, using contrasting textures and colors. So like this example here, they have a grass, but then they have that shrub in front of the grass. Grasses are usually really fine texture. Then the shrub kind of have that big leaf. It kind of creates a different look. It's a little bit more bold. It's a little bit more, it's not as fine textured. Using taller plants in the background and shorter plants in the foreground. Again, so planting in layers, right? So here are our perimeter plants all put together. On the 3D example, oh, they're gonna show us up close. We're good. So I'm going to show you the example of the perimeter plants next. I think we're doing okay on time. Yeah. So what are you using your perimeter plants for? Are you creating privacy? Do you want to use grasses to create kind of a movement look? How are you going to arrange them? So for instructions of what you're going to do when you're doing this on your own, and I guess what I'm going to be doing, you're going to start with the perimeter of your landscape that does not have trees. You want to apply the tallest shrubs first, then working from kind of your fence line or your property line, you want to work inwards, adding shrubs, grasses, and perennials. So let's do that before we go here. Okay, so we're back to our plan here. I did use tape finally to tape it down because it was moving all over the place. So we're going to go from our perimeter. So we have our tree here. We have some empty space right here. I'm going to do shrub right here. I'm also going to do another shrub underneath this tree. They're not going to be as tall as the tree, but I do want them to be taller shrubs. I'm going to have them be the same shrub. And then I'm going to put another of one of those shrubs right there to kind of create that 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of tied in. Let's go to, there's a big tree here, but I'm gonna still put stuff in there. So again, we're gonna have our taller shrubs here. Also keep in mind, on this spot, it's shady. It's on the north side of the house. We have a giant tree here. So when picking shrubs, we need to keep that in mind. And then I'm also gonna put a shrub on this kind of perimeter by our vegetable garden. Wonderful. Coming down here, I'm gonna put an evergreen kind of on this corner. We're gonna kind of create this little secluded space where we have this sitting area underneath this tree. So I'm gonna do an evergreen shrub right here. And then I think it'll look nice if we do maybe a grass right there, maybe like 1, 2, 3 grass look. That'll look nice. On this corner, to kind of create privacy here, I'm going to add more grasses. And then I don't want this to be like completely blocked off. I want it to still like be able to be seen through there. So I'm actually just going to use a rock. Rocks are something that you can always implement, maybe do a couple of them there. So people aren't going to be walking through there, but that they'll still kind of be able to see like, oh, there's a pathway. It helps create interest is what that does. So now we're going over to this way. I'm going to put some grasses right here. I'm going to put a shrub, a couple shrubs right here. Remember these, I don't want these to be too tall so that when people are turning, they won't be able to see over here. But I do want them to be bushy so that like big enough that people aren't going to try to go through my property right there. I'm not going to do 3 right there because I don't want to. I do want these to be flowering shrubs, so I'm going to do some flowers there. These other ones, I don't necessarily have to have them flowering. I'm maybe going to do this one as a flowering one. And then over here, I'm going to put, we have our pathway, remember? Let's move this way. So I'm going to do a rock right here, help kind of create some interest there. I'm going to do some grasses around the rock because that'll look cool. Keeping in mind that like it's going to look cool from this angle and then it's going to look good from this angle too. And then let's do a shrub right here. Maybe 2 shrubs. I'm going to do an evergreen shrub on this corner. We have that evergreen, it'll kind of tie in those 2 together. I'm going to do this same shrub. I'm probably going to tie in over here. We can have 3. I'm maybe going to do another like rock right here with our grasses. Helps kind of tie in that same look. And then let's do like a bigger flowering shrub right here. And then like a few more grasses right here. Okay, so there's the perimeter there. This area is kind of unique because it's kind of a random little area. So I'm just going to kind of put in some shrubs that I have over here to just kind of tie it in, do some grasses here. I'm going to do a rock, some grasses in front of the rock. There's a shrub right here. Do a couple grasses here. And then maybe another shrub in there. Right? Okay. Sweet, so we have our perimeter plants done. Are there any questions about perimeter plants specifically?
There's not. I'm answering just one about some screening.
Okay. Perfect. Sweet. Let's keep going then. I know this is really fast paced. What have I done? Here we go. It's pretty fast paced, but again, this is recorded and it's going to be up on our website shortly. You'll be able to go through this as slowly or as fast as you want to.
Maybe just one thing to add.
Oh, you're muted, Dave.
Sorry, maybe one thing to add as you go through this. The planting can sometimes be really overwhelming. I mean, you kind of know where your central open shape is, you know where your gathering space is, you kind of solidified all that, but then there's so many plant varieties and the colors and textures and sizes. So if you don't know right now that you want a shrub right in a certain space, the really important parts are the structural. If you get trees in the right place, those are big, you know, they're permanent. Well, as they grow, they're more permanent. You just don't move them around. But, you know, you could be a little loose. If you don't know right now, then just kind of draw bigger areas and put perennial mix or perennial shrub mix. And then as you're learning, as you're shopping at nurseries, you see things you like, then you can kind of place those in to the design, into your landscape as you see a need and as you see a fit. So you don't necessarily have to worry too much right now about, you know, being preoccupied about, oh, I don't know if I want a shrub right there or perennial or whatever. You can leave some of these areas fairly loosely defined as planter areas and then add those things in as you learn more.
Exactly. Yeah, Dave, that's a great thing. Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, this is not, that's one thing that people, they do get really caught up on is especially this part is like, I just don't know what to put in there. I don't have a good sense of color, or I just don't know what to do. Just have a general idea of maybe something that you want. And then when you go to the nursery, you can even, there was a bunch of people that would do this. They would get, when I worked at a nursery last summer, they would go and grab a bunch of plants that they liked. And sometimes they'd even grab me and say, hey, can you help me kind of figure out how these plants would look good together? So we'd work together and they would say, here's the area. And I'd say, okay, these grasses, you probably want to put them together and put them in like a corner. And then these perennials will look really nice if you put them kind of like this. So you can even go to the nursery, grab some plants that you like, have a picture even of your area, and kind of set the plants up how you think would look really good in that area. And then you can see them together. That's one thing, is once people saw certain plants together, they were like, oh man, I love that combination. Or they'd be like, actually, those don't look too good together. So this is just, again, a general idea of what you're thinking of putting there. It's not set in stone. You can change it to go towards what you think is actually going to look better. So yeah, that's a great point. All right, so next are your infill plants, which is pretty much everything else except for your park strip, right? So these provide your bursts of colors. They can be your perennials. They fill in the gaps. This can include like smaller shrub. There are some shrubs that stay like 2 feet tall and wide. They're your perennials, bulbs, ground covers. You want these to be less than 3 feet tall. Your plants should be perennial. You don't want to be putting any annuals in there. They're located in between the foundation and the perimeter plants, right? And they're planted in the foreground. So you have like your background, middle ground, foreground. Foreground is where all these plants are going to be going, sorry. You do want to echo similar plant foliage. Just keep that in mind when you're picking plants. Again, you don't have to do that right now, but when you're picking plants, just be like, oh yeah, I had this like bright yellow colored shrub. Maybe I should get some yellow perennials to help tie that shrub in. Again, planting in odd numbers is something that people do. I like to mix it up. Shortest to tallest. With shortest to tallest, I also kind of mix that up as well. I don't put like super short things in the middle, but I do like kind of having varying heights throughout. Kind of like with this, how they have shorter perennials, and then they have the bulbs kind of popping up. I think that looks really cool. Using contrasting textures and colors, that's something that's really important. Questions to ask yourself: where do you need some bursts of color? So if you have like a lot of evergreens in a spot, you're like, man, I just like needs a burst of color. You can do like some really bright perennials there, or you can do a shorter shrub that has a really bright foliage color. Where can you use some seasonal interest? So where are some spots where you're okay if it like gets covered in snow, but during the spring and summer you want some colors, and then how will you arrange them? Again, personal preference. How are you going to do that? I'll show you kind of how I do it. I'm not going to do any specific colors or specific plants right now. I'm actually going to just be using my Sharpie marker, and I'm going to just be using dots for my perennials or shorter shrubs. That's something that I'll be making the decision of whether or not that's what they're going to be when I go to the nursery, right? And then we'll go to park strips after that. Let's see. So I'm going to stop sharing. So now we need to do our infill plants. I'm going to start with this area because I forgot to do the the perimeter plants right here. I'm going to arrange all those in. So shrubs to the same shrub, probably some grasses in between. Okay, perfect. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to put some perennials in and maybe some short shrubs. It's really going to depend. So I'm going to start at this spot right here. So people are going to be seeing it from this direction. They're going to be seeing it from this direction, this direction. So I'm going to put perennials. It's kind of like in there. I don't have any specifics right now. I don't have any specific colors, but I'm going to later go to a nursery and say, I like this perennial and this perennial and this perennial. How can I fit them in this area to make it work? Right? So measuring that area out and then seeing how many perennials are going to fit in there. And if you don't want it to be too crowded, don't put as many in. And then I'm not going to put any in this spot because that evergreen will be there. Let's move to up here. I probably want some perennials right next to my walkway. That'll look really nice. Probably do some in here. Have some like taller perennials right here maybe. Let's see. I'm going to add on this side of the pathway. I want to add some more interest here. Maybe a rock. I'm going to do some grasses right here actually. If I'm doing grasses here, I'm not going to put any perennials like right there. I don't really need it. But I am going to put some right here, right next to the bench. That'll look nice. We probably want some down by the pathway. We'll want some right here by the lawn. Probably a couple right here for people to see when you're walking by. We can maybe do another shrub in here. And then let's see, I'm going to do some grasses right here. So this is just like, it's just showing you how you can be a little bit more, you can just kind of be flexible. If you're thinking about how it's going to look, I mean, you can just kind of see in your mind how it's going to look. There's our little pathway to our sitting area. So I'm going to do some nice perennials for our sitting area. Have some more perennials on the walkway. Have some right here. I'm just going to kind of fill this in.
As Hedian's drawing that in, we do some other classes as well, and there's so much to do here that we can't cover everything all in one class, but we'll be doing a perennials class coming up shortly. So if it's the infill type stuff you're going to be struggling with and what to plant that's a little lower water, low maintenance, that kind of stuff, then tune into that perennials class. Of course, there's other resources everywhere online, Utah State Extension, but if we're happy to help you with these things in pieces. We can't possibly cover every little thing on this class here. So I hope that helps too.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, definitely. Again, like this is not specific to any sort of plant. So there's our design, like pretty simple. As for the park strip part of this, I am just going to use what I've like kind of used in the thing already. It goes over park strip plants. You do want to make sure that you're following your city ordinances with plantings and things. Putting pathways through your park strip is a good idea. I'm going to use plants probably that I've used throughout my landscape to kind of tie it in. Again, it visually unifies the park strip with the rest of the landscape, adds curb appeal. It's a good water-wise replacement for lawn because lawn is not the best thing to do in your park strip. I mean, it can include pretty much anything. You do want them to stay a little bit on the shorter side unless it's a tree. Again, look to see what your city says about that. You do want to keep in mind that they need to be a little bit more salt tolerant. Salt is something that's used on roads after being plowed with snow on them. And so salt can get mixed up with the snow and end up in your plant bed. So using things that are a little bit more tolerant of that, just kind of keep that in mind. You do want them to be tough and hardy. You don't want to put anything like that's super tender in there. There are some plants that they just don't do well kind of being battered a little bit because your park strip is going to be a little battered. Again, echoing your similar plant colors. So you see on this example how the park strip looks really similar to the rest of the landscape. Like it doesn't look super awkward and weird. It's not like all rock and then the rest of the landscape is nice and planted, right? If you want to do all rock, by all means do all rock. You can put the same kind of rock cover in the rest of your landscape to tie it in. This is all like personal preference on how you want it to look and what you want to put in there. So let me show you. I'm just going to hurry and do it on my example here. Well, you guys can watch.
Maybe while you're drawing that in, there was a question about a little bit of concern how you do irrigation through all of this. You know, there's a lot of plant material and it could feel a little overwhelming. So let me just take a little stab at this. Ideally, you're doing spray irrigation on the turf and you're doing drip irrigation in the flower beds. Now the drip irrigation, there are different types you can do. There's inline drip emitters that can be laid out in a grid-like pattern. And the idea with that is that it's watering everything the same. The whole area gets uniform watering and it does a great job. A point source drip means you have a poly type drip line. From that, a 1/4 inch tubing with an emitter that directs water to each plant. So in very densely planted areas, it's a little more difficult because there's a lot of emitters. You got those running everywhere. And of course, you're going to hide all that under mulch. But if that seems a little overwhelming to you, use inline drip tubing that's laid out in a grid. The emitter is inside the pipe. The spacing is every 12 inches. And so you run a line every 12, or you can narrow that in a little bit. And that way you're getting water everywhere, but you're not worried about water to a specific point, a specific plant. And that way it makes it a little easier to do. And it's also flexible enough that if you've already planted, you can just kind of move that around plants a little bit. And then on trees, you can punch in extra emitters if you feel like you need a little more water for the trees, or you can make loops of that tubing around a tree. So that, I hope that answers that question and helps relieve a little anxiety. I've done drip irrigation in my yard for years and it's certainly doable. My yard is not densely planted. I'm okay with some space between plants. I kind of like that. There's areas that are a little more dense, but it works out. And then if you really want to get in the details of that irrigation, we will do a specific irrigation class, and it's a couple hours long because there's so much to talk about there, that we can show you from the valve, fittings to the drip pipe, how the drip connects to everything, a filter, how it all works. But that's a lot more detailed conversation. So let's leave that irrigation with that. And certainly call Hattie Ann on your own if you've got specific things, and we'll go over those. But we want to help you with this and not have you feel like it's just so overwhelming and so crazy, because once you get the feel of it, it's really not as overwhelming and scary as it may seem.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Great. So we have our completed plan here, right? So again, you can change this if needs be. It's not a big deal if you need to make some changes. And is there any final questions that we can answer right now? I'm going to go over some examples of the different shapes and things, and maybe starting off from a whole complete new landscape and then creating something around that. But if there's any final questions, if they come up while I'm showing an example, I can definitely do that. We have a question from Chelsea. What's the best way to deal with existing fruit trees against the back fence? She knows she'll need drip irrigation tubing around the tree, but she doesn't know what to do about plants. Almost an activity zone needing like yearly ladder access. So, I mean, also like, okay, so yearly ladder access as in fruit picking. Yeah. So with that, I mean, you can have that be a plant bed. You might need to like think ahead of like, I'm going to be having to carry a ladder through this. So I don't want to be like crushing plants as I go. So maybe even making a pathway to those trees specifically might be something that you end up doing. You could make it an activity zone, maybe just like making a little like play area over there, or even just adding like maybe a sitting area. But if you need to put a pathway towards those trees so that you have a distinct pathway to carry a ladder to, as far as plants go, like you can put any plants that you want. You probably don't want them to get too close to the tree so that you can move around the tree, but kind of placing them around the area, I think is going to work. I don't know. I hope that helps answer that question, Chelsea.
Well, Hattie, and I could add one thing on that.
Yeah.
Under fruit trees, it depends on how how everything else is structured. You don't necessarily need to have anything under it. If you're thinking, oh, well, what about other plants? Maybe if you're okay with bare space, I've got an area with a couple of fruit trees, and I don't have anything growing them there. I water them with drip, but I've just put mulch on the ground, and that's okay. If you're okay with empty space, you don't need to do anything necessarily specific. Put some mulch on the ground to help with weed control. You've got your irrigation there. It's easy to access the picking of the fruit, the pruning of the tree, because you are walking around it a lot. You don't have to worry about trampling your other stuff. But that's a lot of personal preference, because I've seen people also do fruit trees in with other shrubs, and you kind of just have to step around the shrubs and put the ladder over the top of other things and work around it. So some of that's personal preference on the look you want, as well as the functionality you want. I'm a little more simplistic on that, so I don't have anything under my fruit trees, but that's personal.
Yeah. It's a personal preference. My parents don't have anything under their fruit trees either, so pretty much like personal preference. Janet's asking if we can address working with slopes. Yes. So I'm actually going to show you an example here that I have. It's my parents' yard, and let's see. I'm going to do based off of the design that they have. Make sure that you can see this okay. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So this is their existing landscape that they have right now. And a big part of their landscape that they have are these areas that are taller than other areas. So like right here, they have rock beds, or they have a terrace right here. So these rocks are this terraced area. So they've created a terrace right here so that this area is completely flat, because otherwise there would have been like this slope in between here. It can be tricky depending on your landscape. We do suggest that you don't plant any turf on slopes, just because it can lead to other problems. You can do a sloped plant bed, but that can be kind of tricky with irrigation and with erosion and soil getting moved around, especially during high like rainstorms, because you'll have drip there. So like that'll help with that. But rainstorms and things that are really powerful can end up like really moving that soil around and end up moving plants around. So creating a terrace is usually the best way to deal with that. And it's really going to depend on your own personal landscape. But that's how my parents dealt with theirs. And then even here in the back, they have this little patio area right here. And then this area right here is another terraced rock bed that they've made. And then there's some stairs right there that lead to this area of their yard. But then the rest is this terraced rock face that they've created. So it's really going to depend on your specific landscape, but that's one way that they've dealt with the slope in their yard. I hope that's helpful. And then Dave's answering that other question. So I'm going to just show you some examples of the different lot shapes that I have here. So this is my parents' yard. I'm actually going to be doing some work on it this year. So I've come up with a design. I don't know if they're going to go for everything that I've come up with. I have gotten permission for one of the areas, so we're going to do that area this year. So I started out with my conceptual plan, right? So I decided I wanted turf in these areas, gathering spots. We have our activity zone, that's their sandbox, that's there already. There's their trampoline, and then they already have their fire pit there. So I'm not going to change like a lot of activity zones. I want to add some gathering and sitting areas, but I'm working with an existing landscape, right? So then this is the plan that I've come up with. So decreasing their turf area, this is the area that we're going to be working on this year. So decreasing their turf area to be a lot smaller here. And then in the front yard, decreasing it there, and in the backyard as well. So that's a rectangular design example. And then I have an angular design. Let's see. So this one, I decided to do it as a brand new landscape. So let me take my clip off here. I have this angular landscape. I did the conceptual design right on there. So if I were to have lived in this place, this is kind of what I decided that I would like it to look like. So then I went in and I did this one kind of wonky. I thought that since it was an angular plot, it might look cool to do a little bit more cool looking angles for my central open shapes, which this is a central open shape. This is a central open shape. Have our garden over here. Have a kind of angular fire pit over here. This would be like a sandbox play area. We have our patio there, and then plants would be the rest of the things, right? That's kind of how I worked with that. I mean, so you can see that it'll work for any type of landscape you decide to do. This is that same angular landscape that had existing on it that I did This I just did with all pencil. And this is the Conceptual Design. And then I did more just like softer curves for, let me turn off this clip so it lines up better. There we go. So this one I did more curved things. So I have my patio there. I have like a sandbox area there. This is a shed that they had on their property already. This would be their vegetable bed. Sitting area over here, sitting area here. And then there's their central open shapes, right? So you can work around things that you have already, or if you have a new landscape, you can also make something look really good. So I don't know, those are some examples that I just kind of played around with. This is my parents' yard. If there was nothing there, so if I would have designed it from the very beginning, this is kind of what I decided I would do. Kind of create things a little bit differently. I would have put the trampoline in a different spot. I would have moved the pergola over, done the fire pit area in a different look. So you can see how it'll look different depending on an area that you have to work around or what you decide to do. It's just going to be different. Like it's just, and that's fine if it is different, but if it's going to look a different way. It's all personal preference and how you want things to look. And I don't know, like this is fun for me. I really enjoy doing this kind of stuff. Whoa, super bright. It got super bright in here. There we go. I really enjoy doing this kind of stuff. This is what I went to school for. So doing this kind of designing stuff really excites me. And for me, it's fun. I know it can be super stressful for other people. But if you do it the way that this class is structured, that you're kind of going it step by step, it makes it so much easier. Even as like me gone through all of my courses, doing it this way has made it like easier even for me to think about going through a process that's step by step and then not focusing on the plants quite yet. And then knowing in my mind that, hey, I can change this if needs be. This is not a set plan. It doesn't have to be this way. So I hope it was helpful. If there's any other questions that people need answered, I did have, I think it was a Lacey. I think that she's in the class right now. She might have not been able to make it. I was going to go through, she emailed me, but I'll answer her email. If you have any questions about your design or need any individual help, you can always email me. Add your phone number to the email just so that if I need to call you to get specifics on what you're trying to say, sometimes it's just a little easier to talk to somebody over the phone. But definitely email me with any questions. If you need any helps with specific areas, pictures and things are always helpful. Yeah, that's the material I have. Is there anything else you want to add, Dave?
Well, since this was really good and you went through it really fast, and when we've historically done these in person, we'd like to have you take a little work time. We actually extend this to like 3 hours and have a little work time. We kind of guide you through these and help you get some stuff on paper. So if you feel like you're just stuck, we've got this and you can go back and reference this video, which we hope you do. But if you're just stuck, then call Hattie Ann or call us, set up a time. We're happy to meet with you individually. Definitely. If you're comfortable coming to our office, we'll make some time available for you. You can bring your base plan in and we can kind of guide you through some steps if you're just really, really stuck. Hopefully this will give you enough confidence to realize, you can do this, I can do this, and it'll work. And then the other classes we're doing, reference those on video, attend them in person. Eventually, probably later in the fall, we'll have more in-person classes, but we really want to help you through this, helping you just realize this is doable. You don't have to pay somebody a ton of money. You can gain the confidence and learn how to do this on your own. And then in addition, oh shoot, what was I just gonna say? There's just think of, remember the premise of all of this is we can help you have easily maintained, very attractive, very water efficient and friendly landscapes. That's kind of the premise of all this. You can achieve all of those. To be water efficient, you don't have to sacrifice everything. You know, to be low maintenance, you don't have to sacrifice everything. You can do these things and achieve the aesthetic appeal, the lower water, and the functionality all at the same time. And that's really the bigger picture.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Hope it was helpful. It was really fast that we went through things, but again, reference the video, and always call or email with any questions that you have. I enjoy doing this kind of stuff. So if you need individual help, I'll be more than happy to help you. But yeah, otherwise I think we are.
Maybe just give them your email address just in case somebody hasn't had it in the past from previous class.
Yeah. My email is hfassold. So my name is there on the screen. That's how you spell my last name. So it's just an H Fassold at weberbasin.com. That's my email.
And you're always welcome just to call our main office, ask for Hattie Ann, ask for me.
Yeah, they'll transfer you.
Yeah, we can line things up and try to help you if that's what you need.
Sweet. Yeah. Hope that was helpful. Thanks everybody for coming. I think we're good.
There was one raised hand. It's Katrina. I'm going to allow Katrina to talk. So I'll unmute. So Katrina, go ahead and ask your question.
I just wondered if you would repeat that email address again.
Yeah, for sure. So it's H as in Hattie Ann. So my first name, H Fassold, my last name at weberbasin.com. So HFASSOLD at weberbasin.com.
Or you're welcome to email me as well. It's DRICE at weberbasin.com.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that question.
Sweet. Any others before we? Awesome. Okay, I think we are golden.
I think so. Thanks everybody for coming. Yeah, I don't see any other questions. I guess just contact us and we'll answer them from there if you need more.
All right.
Thanks, Hattie Ann.
Thanks. We'll see you guys.